Conversations on Race program. Normally it happens on the first Monday of the month. This month we're happening on Tuesday because we wanted to let the students who were getting awards get awards. So thank you for joining us on a Tuesday night. Tonight, I want to sort of, this evening's program is special because we are working with Princeton High School students in the racial literacy class. They'll be offering a presentation on the things that they learned this year with their teachers, Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson and Miss Patricia Manhart, Dr. Manhart. Tonight, I just want to give you sort of a run of events. We're going to offer these introductions, which I'm doing now. The land acknowledgement. We're going to go through the community agreements for the conversations. Ms. Trotman Jordan will read the Not in Our Town mission statement, and then we'll move into the presentation of the program from the students and the teachers. After that, Valeria will move us into different rooms. So you'll see that you're being moved into a room. That will be for the facilitated discussion, and then afterwards we're going to be brought back together. So just so you have a sense of what's happening. Now I'd like to read the land acknowledgement statement written by the Not in Our Town group. The land on which this house stands is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. We pay respect to Lenni Lenape peoples, past and present and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenni Lenape diaspora. There are several community agreements that we ask people to take into consideration during the conversations that will happen in the breakout rooms. And please note there will be a facilitator in each room to help you with this. We ask that you listen to each other respectfully so that each person has an opportunity to be heard. Step up, step back. People are encouraged to overcome their reluctance to talk. Take care not to dominate the conversation. Allow everyone to have equal airtime. Be careful not to interrupt when someone else is speaking. Please agree to respect one another's privacy by keeping this discussion and people's names and identities confidential. We ask that you embrace the concept, whatever is said or shared in this room stays in this room. Please speak from your own personal experience to avoid making generalizations. White people may feel uncomfortable when a person of color shares a hard truth. They should also understand that sharing these truths can be painful or even traumatic for the person of color. Ms. Trotman Jordan, could you share the mission statement?
Sure. Not in Our Town, Princeton, is a multiracial, multi-faith group of individuals who stand together for racial justice and inclusive communities. Our focus is to promote the equitable treatment of all and to uncover and confront white supremacy, a system which manipulates and pits all races and ethnicities against each other. Our goal is to identify and expose the political, economical, and cultural systems that have enabled white supremacy to flourish, and to create new structures and policies that will ensure equity and inclusion for all in our community. To uncover the blight of white supremacy on our humanity, we take responsibility to address it and eliminate it in all its forms through intentional actions, starting with ourselves first and our communities. Perfect for this week. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
Is it Dr. BJ now or Ms. Manhart?
Alrighty, kids. There.
Joy, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Gotcha. Good evening. My name is Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson. It is indeed my pleasure to, with my colleague Patricia Manhart, be allowed to present the work and the thoughts in progress of a dynamic pioneer species of student at Princeton High School. Thank you to Not in Our Town for allowing us this space to present works that we think are emergent on the journey to a more socially just, a more racially just society. And so tonight we present a little bit of the work that has been done in the Princeton High School community, not just by our class, but people who are supportive of this community to build racial literacy and competencies of social justice within our community. And so, Ms. Manhart, I'd like you to introduce yourself if you can.
Yep, so I'm Miss Manhart, and thank you everyone for being here. And you know, as we flex and accommodate for where we are right now, my reminder to students is that, you know, in years prior when we've been at the library, so thank you, Kim, for always hosting Not in Our Town. It's so powerful to see everyone in the room, because our students, you know, they might be doing the work in class, and then there's always that desire to act and to impact. And I think that feels really real when they get to be in the community space at Princeton Public Library. So in being on Zoom, I just want to remind everyone that this is still powerful, it's meaningful, it's impactful. And Linda, or whoever had said that somebody is here from Spain, you know, I think that's also really amazing too, that this allows us the opportunity to reach a wider audience tonight. So I'm just excited to be here with everyone. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from our students.
Excellent. Okay, and so with that, we are going to prepare ourselves to jump into this conversation. It's titled Clarity in Spite of Chaos, a year of racial literacy and justice education. So we will walk you through some of the programs, again, that we have in racial literacy and justice at Princeton High School. The students' voices and ideas that will be featured are largely from our racial literacy class for the spring semester. Please understand that we had only about 3 weeks before we moved to a remote learning platform, and so it is remarkable that these students have work to share. And so again, I want to say thank you to them. But we've also invited a group of guests from within the Princeton High School community to share some of the work that they're doing, the PHS Justice League, if you will, a group that they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves later. All right, so here we go.
Hit present.
Yeah, I did hit present. So, all
There
right.
we go. Yeah.
All right. All right, so here we go. All right, so we would like to first acknowledge the incredible losses and gains in the year since we last met. Of course, losing Toni Morrison, losing Kobe Bryant, losing Elijah Cummings were significant losses. And so we'll start by sharing this video.
There is no such thing as race. None.
Really?
There's just a human race. Scientifically, anthropologically, racism is a construct, a social construct, and it has benefits. It has money can be made off of it, and people who don't like themselves can feel better because of it. It can describe certain kinds of behavior that are wrong or misleading. So it has a social function, racism. But race can only be defined as a human being.
If the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race, it's also constructed, it's also made, and it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out, and all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself. If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
You don't think you will ever change and write books that incorporate white lives into them substantially?
I have done.
In a substantial way?
You can't understand how powerfully racist that question is, can you? Because you could never ask a white author, when are you going to write about black people? Whether he did or not, or she did or not. Even the inquiry comes from a position of being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
And being used to being in the center.
And so it is. This is the context for racial literacy and justice. This is the context that we begin our class with so that students understand the construct of race, its power, its embeddedness in sociology. And so we start that way. So we spend time with our students unpacking and packing on hard histories and then unpacking again so that they begin to understand whiteness in the center of this conversation. And so we start the same way with you. So what is this course? What is its context and its content? I wanted to start and celebrate and say ashe, for this is who we are right now. A colleague sent this image to me, and I want to celebrate the fact that Princeton is a progressive community. And Princeton typically seizes the opportunity to see change, and it's welcome. Ms. Manhart?
And this is just the reminder, you know, I saw a lot of students out tonight, and seeing the community come together is absolutely amazing. And I just look forward to sustaining the work, to keep doing the work. I think Dr. BJ, something that we emphasize in class are systems and understanding what's been institutionalized. And so just understanding that this needs to be ongoing, that this is hopefully, I always borrow the quote that the pandemic is the portal, but I hope that we can move through and keep this work going. And tonight gave me that hope.
Yes, we hope you feel that way. So the context, we start with the text. We borrow largely from a model that was shared with us by Dr. Ruha Benjamin several years ago to build out this course from the request of students and parents and teachers who wanted to see something different in the curriculum. Understanding the complexity of the curriculum, we looked to our guide, Dr. Benjamin. And so that book became the framework that we examined racial literacy as racial domination and racial progress. Although the title and perhaps the cover of the book have changed over time, the context still remains, and the framework for this class still remains an understanding of racial domination and racial progress in the United States of America.
And just one more thing on the origin of the class. I spoke with a student today who was a senior, but she was a member of Minority Students Achievement Network. And this was part of her legacy. It meant so, you know, I was just reminded today, but it meant so much to the student to see this class be created. And then I also let her know that the work is being expanded, and we're also trying to move and connect with other schools. So it's just, the student centering is always so important of this piece, in the credit of kind of where this was generated out of.
Absolutely. All right. And so the content itself is these systems. We look at the history and the invention of race, the politics as a system of racial domination and progress, economics, housing, crime and punishment, and you can read. So this model of symmetry between domination, progress in each of these systems is how we've approached the class. So what are our takeaways? Our number one takeaway is that we always have to check in, not only with each other, Ms. Manhart and I co-teach this class, but we check in with our students. It is a ritual, daily ritual. And so with that, I'd like Ms. Manhart to just sort of share some of her thoughts.
Right. And so as we check in, we also reflect on the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Sean Reed, Tony McDade, George Floyd. And I am so grateful that I have a trust colleague that I can check in with to process. And Dr. BJ is just so important because we process together and then we're able to take it to our students. And so what else? What am I trying to say, Dr. BJ? Just how much I appreciate. So we check in and we check in with our students and we're always processing. And so something that I appreciate with this class so much is the deep and caring empathy that we see every day with our students. And then also their understandings again of systems, because earlier in this semester, we also looked at the racial disparities during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this class has always just been such a guiding force for me to be able to process, to work with Dr. BJ, reach our students, and then reach the broader community through this work.
Absolutely. I think the feelings of respect are mutual, and we see ourselves as learners within this community with our students. So takeaway number 2, we have to, in that space, allow ourselves to be vulnerable. I will say that the first few cohorts of students held us accountable in ways that perhaps many who call themselves teachers would be uncomfortable. However, we had taken off our gloves and lowered the guard so that we could learn together. Building community. And so we're always open and we leave ourselves vulnerable. We check in with each other, but sometimes that means that we have to check people directly. And so models of checking and holding each other accountable not only are cast by our authors, but the work of Howard Stevenson to read, recast, and resolve stressful situations as actors in this space is important, and where we're constantly looking at the affect and ways to protect each other and correct what we think is absolute racial domination, even when it happens in our classroom. So as part of that, we have a few things that we sort of make space for. We believe that it is necessary to get out of the classroom and explore where racial domination and racial progress exist. And so I share with you the idea of gaze and going out and observing and being present. And this is an image from the Library of Congress. We were fortunate to go for the first time this year on an overnight trip to Washington, D.C. Thank you to every Not in Our Town member who helped support that effort. We could not have really done it without the support of the members of our community. Whether you bought popcorn or made contributions, we thank you. And so we had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. And what you'll notice is the diversity of students that are here. We got to meet with the Honorable Bonnie Watson Coleman. We went into communities very much like Witherspoon Jackson, called Anacostia, the home of Frederick Douglass. We got to tour and be sort of re-inspired by the work of Dr. King, including his demand for social justice and economic equality. We spent time at the National Portrait Gallery in the halls where social justice took place in an artistic form. And this is our itinerary. We had this opportunity to really go to HBCUs and predominantly white institutions and see how racial domination was being unpacked there. And so understanding and believing in the edict that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men, we embrace this very real responsibility of taking students out. And so we have a couple of legacy trips that I call them. Among the legacy trips that we take is, I'm sorry, I'll pull it back up. Among the legacy trips that we take is riding the 606. We take the 606 bus from Princeton to Trenton. We were fortunate this year because when we went to Princeton this year, we got a chance to actually sit in on a policy meeting with the State Department of Education as they were reviewing the new draft of standards for social studies and science. And so we had an opportunity to contribute to a larger, broader conversation about racial literacy as a demand for education. And so the value of seeing the process was important. And so we don't want to lose sight of that as well. So we have this opportunity to do this work with students, and it is indeed pleasure. It's a pleasure. All right, so with that, sorry about that, we are just about ready to explore our last takeaway, and that is to stay curious. We use art, we use art a lot because this is heavy work. And so the idea that in being joyful, we have to be willing to take all this on and sort of work with scholars is important. And so, Ms. Manhart, you want to?
Can you pull up where we are? Because I'm seeing just the overview of the, so which.
Can you see, Kendi?
Yeah, I see it, Ibram, yeah. So for the art piece, I also know we have pictures of the student work. So I'll wait to talk about the aesthetics. Oh, there we go. I also wanted to just pull out because, so Angela Davis and our students created these blackout poems. They were inspired by the partnership between the visual artist, Titus Kaffar, and the poet, Dwayne Betts. And so I loved seeing Angela Davis centered in this work. Because I remember when she spoke in Princeton, one of the questions from the audience was, how do you sustain? How do you, keep going in this work that's so difficult? And she's obviously always been at the center or as a part of the struggle. And she said that artists are the ones who maintain resilience in the struggle. And so when we started this year with the aesthetics piece and we collaborated with Judy Buckley in our art department, it was just so meaningful to see that connection. And I'm just going to read one brief Angela Davis quote. Angela Davis says that progressive art can assist people to learn not only about the objective forces at work in the society in which they live, but also about the intensely social character of their interior lives. Ultimately, it can propel people towards social emancipation. So this was just one piece of where we started the year when we were still together this semester.
And so here are additional texts. So what you saw when we first opened this section is Ms. Manhart and I working on an Ain't I a Woman blackout poem. But these are the texts that we used to sort of build out from the very start a context for understanding just what Angela Davis, our guide in this work, has done. So the question, why do we need a racial literacy class? Well, I think now more than ever, that's less of a question. And so this idea, what's that look like? Beyond our racial literacy class, we have clubs and students that are working. Many of them have taken our class to sort of draw greater attention to the need to honor the least of these. Our smallest population is doing a lot of critical work. And
Dr. Vijay, I think what was really important too is that you made it a point at this event to bring together every student club, so that way they could collaborate and build those coalitions to sort of know one another and know the work that's happening at the high school.
Yes, so this actually is an exonerated man who was our speaker, and through a partnership with Centurion and the culture clubs in our school, we had students and teachers there to hear the voice of the exonerated, the innocent, and wrongfully imprisoned. And it was a fantastic experience. All right, so the Statement of Values is another project happening in our school, and I'm going to now defer to Raisa, or whoever her speakers are.
All right, hi everyone. So we are a couple of representatives from the Statement of Values Task Force. My name is Raisa Rubin-Stankiewicz. I'm here with Ituna Adebayo and Surya Balika, and we're going to speak very briefly as to some of the work that we've been able to do with the Statement of Values. So essentially, the Statement of Values was a project that had the idea for which had actually come from the district, and when it the idea was to bring together a task force of students representing the various diversity and social justice clubs in the school in order to create a vision statement for what a more equitable community could look like in our district and in our schools, and two, some of the steps that the school would have to take in order to get there. And so we ended up coming together for Dr. BJ knows for a long time, bringing together a bunch of different students. The first workshop was attended by about 25 students, and just to talk about what such a statement could contain and to create the statement. So what essentially, to give you a sense of some of the things that are included in the statement of values, because we definitely do not expect you to read that big block of text. Although if you do want to take a look, Itunu just posted a tiny URL link where you can take a look at the statement in its entirety. So some of the ideas that we discuss within the statement and values include the idea of the importance of confronting incidents of bias collectively as a community when they happen, and focusing on the underlying causes of such incidents. Because unfortunately, we've had a fair number of experiences in the Princeton community with incidents of bias that get a lot of press, even at the national level, discussing the importance of working towards a more restorative approach to discipline, encouraging the creation of a secure reporting system for incidents of bias when they do happen in the school, which is a district goal, but we really wanted to emphasize the importance of ensuring that it could be done in such a way that students felt comfortable stepping forward when they view incidents of bias without kind of fear of any sort of retribution. And then just general goals that are really, really important to an equitable community, which are ensuring that all students see themselves and their identities reflected in the curriculum, something which this racial literacy class takes a great steps towards, and ensuring that the staff of the district reflects their student body. So these are just some of the things included in the statement for how our district can become more equitable and what that sort of looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Itunu.
So why a statement of values? We wanted to make a statement that we wanted to make the values of restorative justice and equity officially stated in the handbook so that we could use it to serve as a roadmap to future activism work. Having a student written statement demonstrates and proves the importance of the student voice in involvement and in creating an equitable school.
And lastly, the statement, so although that we have this very impactful statement, at the end of the day, the statement is just words and we need to put words into actions. So the main action that we've actually received news of today is that the statement is set to be implemented in the student handbook for the 2020 to 2021 school year, which is a really great news, and we're so excited about that. And in addition, we plan to work with peer group to because since peer group contains 9th graders, so then if we work with them with the peer group organization, we can early on give those attending PHS an understanding of institutionalized racism and what we can do to combat it within our school environment. And also we plan to go more deeply into the institutionalized racism by combating the rules within our school. So for example, we plan to provide student input as the school works to make the code of conduct more restorative in language and in practice, as well as establishing a secure way for students to report incidents of bias. So that's a really crucial thing that we've been doing. And I'm just so excited about the work that we've been doing, and it's really interesting, and I'm so grateful. So yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
It's taken several years to actually advance that. So it's been a powerful coalition. And while this is designed to feature our students, we wanted to give space for them as well, including Raisa, who is one of our students. So thank you very much. All right, so the moment we've all been waiting for.
Products.
Yay! So Ms. Manhart, you want to talk about what transfer products are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key point of this class is that, we can talk about anti-racism, and that is significant. an important part of the work, but the work in this class needs to go outside of the classroom. So our transfer product is designed as sort of a capstone, a final project for students to take what they've learned and process it in the medium of their choice before sharing it out to a wider audience. I also appreciate that Dr. BJ, you included the anti-racism resources here. It's been good to see just how like reading, right? Like just understanding that educational piece is such an important part of this ongoing work. So again, I'm optimistic seeing that Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist is one of the top books right now. So I appreciate that our students are doing that work. And the last piece, just before we turn it over, is just, we always remind students that racial literacy is a journey. We don't have tests in this class. You know, no one takes a test and just, it's like, congrats, you are now racially literate. So just emphasizing that piece of this being a journey, and everyone is at different points in this journey, and that it's ongoing is just an important aspect of what we do. So, okay, I think yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm good. I was just making sure we got it all in. And so our first presenter is actually Andrew. So let's get Andrew an opportunity to get himself ready.
Hi. How are you?
Cool. Present. Oh, pull that up. Try, Dr. BJ, maybe reload because I'm still seeing the
loading. Okay, hold on.
Just to take the Andy slide.
Is that, can you see him now?
It's
all right. Got it.
Like, okay, wait. Yes, we're here. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so cool. Should I start?
Yeah, take it away, Andy.
Yeah, so I did a presentation on sampling, and because I'm a very musical person, so I really wanted to focus on aesthetics and kind of that unit. So I have a whole presentation. If you click the link, it should bring you to
yep. Got it. Working on it. Got you.
Cool. So yeah, this so this presentation is called Sampling: How the Black Community Pioneered an Art Form. I'm going to time myself because there's a lot of info and I don't have a lot of time. So all right. Yeah, next slide. So brief history of sampling. Next slide. Sampling is just basically, if you don't know, it's taking existing recordings and repurposing them or reusing them. This has been around since the 1940s. An instrument known as the mellotron is a good example as a first sampler. It's introduced in 1963. It had like tape loops with all these orchestral sounds. At the bottom, I have an example of the mellotron. If you're Beatles fans, Strawberry Fields Forever uses this like beginning. There's like a flute effect or something like that. That's from like just tape loops. And then in the 70s, we had like the digital sampler, which actually, you know, took it. There's like, you can see the photo over there. The Fairlight CMI is like the first major one to hit people. If you're familiar with people like Kate Bush or Peter Gabriel, those were some of the stuff they like to use. Next slide, please. Thank you. So sampling and how it drove hip hop. Next slide. So yeah, started in New York by mostly Blacks who are from disenfranchised and marginalized backgrounds. There's a lot of, this is, by the way, hip hop, multicultural influence, many people's heritages from Latin America and the Caribbean. All that multicultural influence, as well as the equipment they had, which was turntables and a lot of old records, some of which were like blues or soul or R&B. That was what people had in those communities. A lot of people could not afford like traditional instruments. So it was a lot of turntables and more music, stuff associated with playing music rather than like performing it. So the first person to really try to utilize sampling is DJ Kool Herc. That is the infamous story of him using the breakbeat at a party in 1973, the birth of hip hop. So he's just like looping and playing over again the same drum beat so people can dance over it in like the middle of a song or stuff like that. Yeah, so this sampling was not only important to the community, but it's also responsible for making hit songs both commercially and tracks with socio-political subject matters. It's been the backing for decades and decades and decades. Here's three of my favorites over here. Rapper's Delight, which famously uses Good Times by Chic, Straight Outta Compton, and Me, Myself, and I by De La Soul. Both kind of combine a lot of different samples and stuff like that from different places. And in the 80s, we start seeing digital. So now sampling becomes more accessible and easier to do. And now sampling is starting to influence pop music more and bigger, you know, top 40 hits and stuff like that. So now more people can use it. This is just a slide about, you know, how it's become more accessible. It's now basically a staple. Yeah, there's also the legal controversies from it. Obviously, since you're taking a recording of somebody else's like copyrighted material, there's a lot of examples, both from past to present. There's various examples. You hear all the time different cases about it. And this is the important thing, the arguments against sampling. And this is what I was trying to get at the whole time, because there's many people who try and discredit sampling and try to criticize it for being unoriginal or uncreative, which is one, extremely irritating to me, because it is a valid and true art form. It's taking something else and making it new, but it's not trying to cover it up. It's not saying, like, there's a lot of examples of bands trying to cover it up, but this one's saying, no, this is it. I'm repurposing this, I'm reusing this, I'm recontextualizing it for me. There's so many people who try and discredit sampling and hip hop in general by saying, yes, it's uncreative, it's theft, it's this or that. But it's, you know, it was an importance, and it was out of necessity too. This like art form was out of necessity. So yeah, that was my just take on it. I just think it's a very important art form. I just have listed a bunch of different samplers of people who are famous for sampling. Kanye West is in there. Yeah, find it. I just invite you to go to whosampled.com. It's a great website. See who samples certain songs. And then I made an original composition. I think what I want to do with this one, it's about 2 minutes long. What I want to do is I'll copy the link, because I think playing it from here for the audio is going to make it sound horrible. So I'll copy the link. Make sure you're on mute if you're listening to it. And yeah, so let me just get this link down in there. If you can't click the link, if it's not showing up blue or whatever, that's fine, because there's like 100 people here apparently. So if it's not working for you, it's fine. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Yeah, here's the link. So please listen.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. All right. Can you see my screen? Julia?
Okay, so for my project, I created an art piece that was supposed to show how mass incarceration is just a new version of slavery in America. So, wait.
Yep, hold on.
Okay. Can you click the link, or do I?
Yep, it's there.
Wait, how do I do it?
I'm there. Listen, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, we see the prison abolition slide. Was there a link in there, Julia? Because
I attached.
Yeah.
The website that I made.
Yes, it's here. We're looking at a website.
No, you're on the slide, I think.
I'm seeing the slide. Maybe hit refresh, Dr. BJ. I think we're coming. We'll get there.
Sorry about that.
We'll get it.
It's an amazing amount of coordination.
There we go.
Okay, so I painted a picture of, I found an image of a slave online, of an enslaved person online, and then someone who was in a chain gang, and then someone who's in a current prison. And then I made the background newspaper articles during the abolition movement, and then about chain gangs, and most of these were from when it was ending, and then I printed out modern day articles about what an issue mass incarceration in America is. And then I wrote a small summary about the ideas behind prison abolition. So it's basically saying that the way prisons are built is they're assuming people will still commit crimes and that they will get punished for them, instead of trying to find ways to keep people from committing crimes, which shouldn't be to increase police. It should be to help fix the like toxic masculinity and cis heteropatriarchy, rape culture that leads to sexual assaults, and the other reasons people go into lives of crime. Wait, Dr. BJ, can you scroll more to show?
I gotta go back to it. Okay.
Sorry.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah. So basically, I can also put a link if anyone wants to read all of it, but it says like people who commit crimes, they shouldn't be thought of as just criminals, and that the act, like the crime they committed shouldn't define them for the rest of their lives, and we need to find ways to achieve justice for victims of crimes, but also rehabilitate people and keep their humanity and not destroy lives by putting people in prisons and destroying entire communities by imprisoning people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Awesome.
All right. So our next presenter is Julie. So let me pull you up. Let me get you up. And Julie, you want to pull yourself in?
I don't need to put my like Google Slides, I think this is fine.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So my presentation is just centered around like the identity of Black women. And so at first I really wasn't able to find any information online just when typing like Black women's identity. So I decided to write about Black women's identity through these three artists, which is Carol Walker, Audre Lorde, and Beyonce. So first I want to address the characterization of Black women and then talk about these two stereotypes. So the first one is the angry Black woman, and it's a stereotype that characterizes Black women as angry and just aggressive. And an example of the stereotype is back in 2018 when Serena Williams lost the US Open. Her reaction to the referee's call wasn't really different to how probably another player would have reacted in the heat of the moment, but it just ties back to the idea that Black women aren't really supposed to push back, and when they do, they're deemed to be domineering and aggressive. The second stereotype is the strong Black woman. It basically means that the defining quality of Black womanhood is just strength, and the idea of strength ends up undermining its real function because it just obscures Black women's experiences of suffering, and it ends up harming their mental, emotional, and physical health. And it's a stereotype that is a cultural ideal and psychological coping mechanism that stems from all the way back from slavery, because female slaves had to find a way to deal with all the trauma they experienced. And so I think that by creating art in different ways, which is music, writing, and visual representation for these artists, these women have given themselves a voice to express their experiences, their struggles, and themes relating to gender, race, sexuality, and identity. And I think that these three women demonstrate how practicing their choice of artistry has been an act of defiance against the oppressor, who's trying to silence them and make them feel as if they are powerless. So the picture in the middle, yeah, Audre Lorde, she's a self-described Black lesbian mother, warrior, poet, and she dedicated both her life and her creative talent to confronting and addressing injustices of racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia. Next is Carol Walker. She's an American contemporary artist who explores race, gender, sexuality, violence in her work. And her cut paper silhouettes, they depict historical narratives of everything that I said before, sexuality, violence, and subjugation. So her work is definitely related to history, and she's able to connect the past and the present together. And lastly, Beyonce, she's an American singer, and something that I realized is that she has changed the meaning of the term, the strong Black woman. And through her performances and her music, she's able to communicate that a strong woman is a woman who's independent, confident, and loves herself. And she's also openly vocal about what it's like to be a Black woman and what it means for her. So I think by her being open about the mental and physical difficulties she's experienced, throughout her music career, and she's going against what the old term meant to do, which was oppress Black women by making them conceal their trauma and hardships. So finally, in the past, the world of literature, visual representation, media didn't have a structure or platform set in place for Black women. And I think that these women had to create their own paths. And by doing so, they created paths for other Black women in the industry, because when young Black women see a reflection of themselves in these roles and in these positions of power, they say to themselves, oh, I can do that. I can become this person. So yeah.
Yes, thank you, Julie. All right, so Ashwin.
Hello. So the topic that I wanted to talk about and bring awareness to was curriculum violence. So if you can pull up the slides.
Yeah, I can't, the access is not there.
Oh, actually, okay, let me.
Ashwin, are you able to look at the slideshow on your screen, and then we'll keep this screen up just so we eliminate that kind of back and forth, or would you like us to get your slides up too?
I just added access. If you can try it again, if you click the title, it's linked in the title, like in the
yes.
actual.
Yes, I know. That's
what
was access denied. Okay, go ahead and talk about curriculum violence, and now I'll do my best.
Okay, I can share my screen if you want.
Yes, share your screen. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Okay, so can you see it now? Okay.
Yes.
So the issue that I wanted to bring awareness to was curriculum violence. If you see on this slide, right, do you think people from different castes are inferior? British rule greatly modernized India by providing them with valuable technology such as the railway system. Do you worship cows? All of these things are questions I've been asked by peers in my various history classes throughout my life. And I honestly can't blame them, because I don't think it's their fault. I think that a lot of times the curriculum is set up in such a way that it provides a single story about certain groups of people, and they sometimes have questions that align with that the ignorance that arises from a single story. So the definition of curriculum violence is when educators have constructed a set of lessons that harm students intellectually and emotionally. Pretty much all people of color experience curriculum violence in some form throughout their lives, but I wanted to touch upon two really important instances in which groups are marginalized by curriculum violence. So firstly, one thing that I learned a lot from is from Dr. Debbie Reese's talk. She talked about how discrimination takes place against Native Americans, Indigenous Indians in our society. And so she was talking about how in school projects, they make students create Indian names by combining random words, or making arts and crafts project out of sacred items like feathers. And it is very disrespectful to the actual culture of Indigenous Indian kids, and it honestly makes them feel as if their culture is less important than the predominantly white culture of America. And additionally, that they're forced to celebrate Columbus Day, a holiday which acknowledges somebody who has actually committed a genocide, with a national holiday, which is absolutely horrible. And then what I would say, who is the most impacted by curriculum violence, I would honestly, in my personal opinion, I would say that Black people are affected most by curriculum violence in the classroom. This is because America has had a long history of racism against Black people. And so we need to bring awareness to that by discussing the difficulties that they've had to face throughout history. But oftentimes, the way that the curriculum is structured is that it singles out Black students by discussing very difficult histories that may be traumatic to hear, such as like the horribly inhumane conditions that were faced on like slave ships in the Atlantic, and sometimes violent imagery like which I've seen. Sorry, I saw like Emmett Till, the acts that were committed against Emmett Till, and when students are made to work on activities that involve such painful histories, it can really be emotionally stressful. Actually, the person who defined curriculum violence on the third slide, Dr. Stephanie P. Jones, when she was in elementary school, she was made by her teacher on a field trip to pick cotton, and at the time she didn't really see it as anything significant, but when she later realized what had happened, she felt extremely violated. And she said that the teacher didn't intend to be so harmful, but it did inflict a lot of emotional trauma on her. And what has happened is that because we don't have enough awareness about curriculum violence, these same mistakes are being repeated. In 2019 in South Carolina, a fifth grade class was made to do the same thing, to go to a plantation to pick cotton, which is absolutely horrible. And on a personal level, one of my best friends has told me about his experience in the classroom, and that whenever people talk about African Americans, they basically, all the students will start looking at him and asking questions about it as if, and just singling him out. And I just think it's kind of unfair that he can't go to class and just look at the lesson like everybody else. It's as if he's different from everybody else, which he obviously is not. And so really one of the talks that has personally influenced me a lot in my life is so Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who actually wrote Americana. She gave a TED talk about a single story, where she basically talked about what a single story is. So a single story is a narrative that we're given that reduces people and situations to one single point of view. And it's damaging because it causes us to view that group of people or those people or that situation through only one perspective. And almost always, because of normalized white domination in society, it's usually the white perspective. And so this actually connects very strongly into curriculum violence, because I remember actually that Dr. BJ was talking about how in our school we might not have any Black teachers. She might be the only Black teacher that we have, and actually for this year it actually is true for me. And so when they in the curriculum, when they teach, they teach about white people and the white perspective so much that Adichie was talking about how when she was trying to become a writer, she only wrote about blonde-haired and blue-eyed characters when she was young, because she felt like it was unimportant, the stories of people who looked like her. And honestly, I can say that that's a prime example of just the danger of curriculum violence. So what can we do to end curriculum violence? So I know that the two history teachers that I've had this year, since I had the same history teacher my freshman year and this year, they've both made a really strong effort to actually combat curriculum violence. I remember even last year with Miss Manhart, that she used to make sure to give the Black perspective on a lot of issues that I don't remember having when I was in middle school. And same thing with Miss Neen. She makes sure to bring all the perspectives in. So basically, the most important thing to combat curriculum violence, if you've ever heard of something, if you've ever heard of the best step to solve a problem is to identify it. It's the same thing. The most important thing to combat curriculum violence is to recognize it. Most people are actually unaware that it even exists, and I myself had not until Dr. BJ had taught me. So once it's recognized, what should we do? We should have curriculum makers to develop with a strong anti-racist framework in mind, and educators and teachers should ask themselves about whether the content they're teaching is free from curriculum violence. A really great question would be, what historical events or situations am I asking that students examine and experience? This ensures that students are engagingly and productive with difficult histories instead of negatively engaging with them. For example, when bringing awareness to this history of discrimination against Black people in America, teachers should bring up writings by Black authors and accounts of Black people of the time to ensure that whiteness does not blot out the true events. An example of definitely what not to do is what Dr. Grinnell's elementary school teacher did, which is to have students engage in demeaning activities to demonstrate these difficult histories. Thank you.
All right. So, Ashwin, thank you. We have 4 more students, and so we're going to jump right in. And I want to just say we will leave time for conversations afterward. Can you see my screen? Right, Raisa?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, hi everyone again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about an issue that I think is particularly relevant today, which, as some of you might know, 8 states are holding their primary elections today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about voter suppression, and particularly how voter suppression methods have shifted and how I predict they will continue to shift during a pandemic, which has changed everything else about our society. So it's not surprising that it's changing this as well. So the most important thing to begin with, as a little bit of background, although I'm sure many of you know about this already when we're talking about voter suppression, is to talk about the 2013 Shelby County versus Coulter Supreme Court decision, which rolled back a portion of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And essentially what this portion of the vote, getting rid of this portion of the Voting Rights Act did was it took away the Department of Justice's ability at the national level to prevent the implementation of laws that would put an undue burden on voting access in states with a history of voter suppression, and the ability of the Justice Department really to oversee those states to the ability that they had before. And this made it easier for voter suppression efforts to be implemented in these states, given the already decentralized US voting system, where states, and often specifically counties, because a lot of voting decisions happen on a county by county level, are making these voting decisions often for federal elections, and therefore it's a lot harder to highlight voter suppression efforts when they do happen, and it's a lot easier for there to be misinformation because information changes on a county by county basis. However, this is kind of just a general voter suppression thing. What people think of when they think about voter suppression in the pandemic is the Wisconsin primary, where there were thousands, tens of thousands of mail-in ballots that were disregarded by Wisconsin residents who had requested or never received their ballots, or had received them after the election, or had sent them in but they had been received until election day. And the typical 180 polling places in the city of Milwaukee, instead of having 180 polling places, they only had 5, which is just an example of the immense reduction in polling places across the state. And so not only were there fewer places to vote in person, people weren't allowed to vote by mail, even when they had already taken the necessary steps to do so. And they were forced to be put in a situation where they either lost their ability to vote or they put their lives and their healths in danger. And this is a model that a lot of people have said is a concern that this will happen in other states across the country. So let's look at another example of a state a little closer to home, Pennsylvania, which actually is having its primary election today, and has implemented a bunch of voting reforms that have actually made things a little bit easier to vote. So they have had a lot of similar problems to the Wisconsin primary, even though they haven't had as concentrated of an effort to suppress the vote, including the fact that there is just a complete overwhelming of the counties and the county election offices because of a mail-in ballot, the number of requests for mail-in ballots, when the capacity of mail-in ballots in the past and the number of and the demand for mail-in ballots in the past has not been this much. So they had in the past, only about 100,000 people in Pennsylvania have requested mail-in ballots. This year, more than 1.8 million people have. And so what this has meant is that there are, even today, there are a lot of people who have not received their mail-in ballot, just like in Wisconsin, even though they requested it as much as 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And so if they are either forced to go in person and vote provisionally, or basically not to be able to vote at all. And this is a problem that I think we're going to be seeing across the nation potentially moving forward. There also have been a lot of incorrect ballots that have been sent out to voters, including voters who have received the primary ballots for the opposite party, which is again, if you don't get it in enough time, you end up in the exact same situation where you cannot vote by mail. And all of this is happening as county election offices and polling places are across the state. The number of them are being diminished in capacity and in size. And as there are long lines outside of many of the polling locations. And there's a very racialized impact of all of these things, including in the number of people who have registered for mail-in ballots because of all this confusion. Even though there has been a surge in interest in mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, 91% of requests were from white voters and just under 6% were from Black voters. And so these are some of the examples of what's been happening on a state-to-state basis in some of these case studies. But we also know that there are going to be concentrated efforts on a national scale to suppress the vote. And we know this because there's already a plan for it. So there is a $20 million plan to essentially challenge lawsuits to challenge any decisions by voting activists that are trying to loosen state restrictions on voting with lawsuits, to recruit up to 50,000 volunteers in 15 key states to monitor polling places and to challenge voters when they try to cast their ballots. They already have training sessions for these election monitors, and to advertise about how election fraud is such a big deal. And this is being led partially by the Honest Elections Project, which has already joined in legal battles over voting in 6 states and spent $250,000 on advertising opposing vote by mail. So what this is going to mean is that there's going to be a real threat and challenges and on people challenging others' ability to vote, which we know tends to happen. Voting challenges tend to be towards people of color. We know that historically as a fact. And we know that there is going to be a lot of poll monitoring, which again, we know in the past does tend to be targeted towards communities of color. In fact, a local example in New Jersey, poll monitors, there was an incident where off-duty officers were recruited to be poll monitors, and they wore badges, armbands that said National Ballot Security Task Force, and they patrolled polling places in Black and Latino neighborhoods in New Jersey, essentially like having an armed presence there. So that, even though they weren't armed, but essentially like making it like a security presence in the state, in the neighborhoods. So we know that this is what's going to happen at the national level. And we know what's going to happen in the state-to-state level. What does this potentially mean for the New Jersey primary? So one of the things it means is there's going to be the same problem probably with vote by mail capacity, although hopefully a little bit better because New Jersey is sending out vote by mail ballots to all registered voters and allowing the ballots to come in up to a week after elections, but counties are still going to be overwhelmed. We also know that this is another element that is New Jersey specific, is that we just recently passed a law allowing those on probation and parole to register, which is tens of thousands of voters on probation and parole, which is fabulous. But this was only started beginning in March 2020, which is right when the pandemic began, which means we're going to have a lot of people who are eligible to vote, but are going to have a really, really hard time registering to vote and getting information about voting. And those are, so that's sort of very specific to New Jersey in the primary, what we can expect. There's going to be the same difficulties with vote by mail capacity, and there's going to be additional problems because of the recent policies that are actually really, really positive and are trying to expand the right to vote, but that because of this time period, it's going to be much harder to get out voter information. So what can we do? And Dr. BJ, I'm not sure I see the slides being shared with the—
No, you're at 9 minutes and we have a few more students. So your slides, you can put a link to your slides and share them if people want to share out, so that we can go ahead and your time is ticking. So there you go.
because we do want to hear the what to do aspect, Raisa, so thank you for that. So please make sure that you share, because the call to action is important. We just want to make sure that we hear from everyone. And in that respect, I put our breakout room discussions, we're not breaking out anymore just because of the timing, but they are linked here in a Google document. So we encourage everyone on their own to read through the questions, reflect. If you are around people to have this conversation with, open it up to have this discussion. And we're going to do a Q&A after our students have presented. Please type any questions that you have into the chat, and that way we can address your questions after the student presentations. Thank you.
Yes.
Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi, Rebecca.
Okay, so I did like a blackout poetry kind of thing for the poem Caged Bird by Maya Angelou. Kind of my representation of what the poem is, but I'm first going to go over a little bit about Maya Angelou. So Maya Angelou was born April 4th, 1928, and during this time she was struggling because she was a Black woman. In 1965, she spent her time working as a journalist and tried to help Malcolm X with the organization of focusing on Black power, but he was assassinated before she could. And by 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. asked her to help organize a march for Black power, but he was assassinated and she couldn't follow through with the march. And in 1968, she wrote her famous autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, about her life. Talking about how she suffered and when she was raped. So, the meaning behind the poem Caged Bird. So it was published in Maya Angelou's 1983 poetry collection, Shaker, Why Don't You Sing? The poem describes two different birds, one free and one suffering in a cage. The caged bird sings to express its longing for freedom and its hope that one day it will be free. So Maya Angelou paints a picture of oppression, showing the privilege of the unoppressed, the free bird, and the suffering of the oppressed, the caged bird. The poem portrays the experience of being a member of the African American community. The caged bird is a metaphor for the African American community's past and ongoing experience in race-based oppression going on in the US in particular, or any other oppressed groups of people. And there are multiple meaning of themes going on in the poem itself. So oppression in the African American experience, freedom versus captivity, and lastly, the freedom as a universal and natural right. So now going into my perspective, when I was reading this poem, I immediately thought, the free bird was a white person and the caged bird was a Black person. So in the 1980s, there was still slavery going on. So this is what it kind of represents. To kind of explain, the drawings. The white person, who's the free bird, its wings show orange sun rays, which is in the poem itself actually, and it says, and it dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky, so it's representing the freedom of it. And I painted his body yellow kind of to show light and happiness and not thinking about the suffrage of that time, and to explain the bird in the cage, which I represented as a Black person. That person's body is Black because of darkness and suffrage and pain, and I made the wings kind of like a blue, kind of fading from darkness to light, kind of that hope of being able to fly again. So yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. So good to hear from you. So well done. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we're up. Next up, Spencer. Hold on. Let me get that. Thank you, Rebecca. That was amazing. Okay, Spencer.
All right, so my transfer product was basically attempting to focus on the misrepresentation and overrepresentation of Black and brown bodies in the 1960s. And so as we've seen in 2020, there's a lot of similar representation going on. So I just wanted to use this to compare the two times. So I began this transfer product after a discussion with my mom about the Black Panther Party, the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s. She grew up in a white suburb of New Jersey while protests and riots surrounding the movement were happening. So she it fostered a fear towards the Black Power movement as a child because of negative media and how her town socialized her into an implicit bias against the Black Power movement. As people like Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Assad Shakur, and many other Black Power leaders were overrepresented in media as criminals. So I did some research trying to find a representation of this in the 1960s, and I found a lot of representation of the Watts riots as well as the Detroit riots. And so they used terms like riot, criminal, disturbing, violent, deadly, toxic, looters, damaging to represent the people who were trying to fight for justice and equality at the time. And then the next slide basically shows a representation of words that are being used currently to talk about what's happening with the race protests in many different parts of America. And words include powerful, respect, justice, activists, patriots, Black Lives Matter, empowering, etc. So the next slide shows my transfer product, which was basically just trying to show how we have a new representation and a new way of consuming media. So using this research, I wanted to represent how media consumption during the current protests compared to media consumption during the civil rights movement. So I created this visual, which shows on the left Angela Davis being criminalized before she was even tried, and many other examples of that. And then on the right, showing more current times, which although still represent a media bias surrounding the current protests of police brutality in the Black community as violent in some cases. We now have other resources, including social media, online newspapers, articles, books, etc., written about the subject to counteract the media bias of some news outlets. So with so much media at our fingertips, we are now able to go out and look for articles surrounding current racial issues from both sides, the sides of the oppressors and the sides of those being oppressed. So this allows us to formulate our own opinions about current news. So what I wanted to do with this painting and research was show how we need to challenge ourselves to consciously consume media and identify how media is being represented. So the words used to describe the protests currently matter. And as we have seen throughout history, it will affect the way that these events are remembered. That was mine.
Whoa, yes, yes, yes.
Thank you, Spencer.
Last student. Matt?
Hi.
Hey, all right, so I'm gonna stop sharing because I will go directly. Introduce yourself.
Hi, so my name is Matthew. I'm a junior. I go to Princeton High School. And so I'm very into film, and I decided to make a presentation, like an analysis of a movie, Kirikou, which I watched very often as a kid. And so, oh, this is my presentation. Okay, perfect. So yeah, so Kirikou and the sources. If you could go to the next slide. Is it moving or is it?
Yeah, it did move, but this is the challenge. I'm sorry. All right. Can you?
So the plot summary. So Kirikou is a young boy who was born in a West African village depleted of water and gold by the sorceress Karaba. Despite his small appearance compared to the other citizens, he solves problems that never seemed approachable before. There are 3 Kirikou movies that all depict him as a cunning problem solver in many different short stories, put in one, and he uses a small appearance to his advantage.
Yeah.
So my experience with the film. So I watched it as a kid, as I said before, and this is basically the equivalent of Frozen in Europe. Like almost everyone has seen it. It's a very widespread. And I never initially viewed it through a racial lens. I saw it as a story of a young problem solver. But seeing it now, I realized that it's so much more, which I'll get into later in the presentation. So the aesthetics part. So I found this quote in our textbook that says, in the past centuries, whites held virtual monopoly over the dominant images of beauty, genius, and art. As a result, white artists could misinterpret non-whites. And so I found, since I'm looking like at European art and aesthetics and racially related art, I compared it to a Belgian comic called Tintin, and it's Tintin Goes to Europe. And so this is a very racist depiction of African people, and then you compare it to Kirikou, and they're not cartoonized or anything. And what's really great about this is, I think I get into it a little bit later, but the director and the story maker of Kirikou is white. And so he didn't use his white power to misinterpret African people, and he just, you know, brought it up and showed the culture. Thank you. So aesthetics and racial progress. So if you know about the doll test, I found a quote in the textbook that says non-white children learn from a very young age that to be white is to be pretty and desirable. And these internalized biases do not necessarily fade with age. So the good part with this movie and the racial progression with this movie is that it puts a young Black child in a positive light. And it shows beautiful men and women in traditional clothing. If you can see Karaba, who's a sorceress, who's the woman in that picture. I mean, the drawing and is really incredible in this movie. And it teaches children that Black is powerful and beautiful. So I did an analysis of Karaba. So she's the sorceress, and I wanted to see, you know, what culturally from West Africa she was wearing and things like that. So there are traditional neck rings worn by the, I'm sorry, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but the Ndebele people. And then there's the sarong. Sorry, my French slipped out there. The sarong, which is a clothing garment wrapped around the body. It's kind of like a thick scarf. And her hair is not cartoonized, and it shows traditional locks. But she has, you know, this aspect of kind of like villainous because she's a sorceress of the town. And then gold is representation of wealth and nobility in African culture, which she wears all over. So this is the hair in Kirikou. So there are traditional hairstyles that were taken from West Africa and included in this story about a West African village. And you can see here just the, yeah. So the director and the voice actor. So the director, like I said before, is white. He's an example of a white artist representing African culture in an artistic and uplifting way and not bringing white influence in the movie. There is never any white characters in the movie. It's all about West African people. And all the voice actors are Black people. This is the Kirikou, the voice of Kirikou. I could not find any pictures of the man himself, but he is from Guadeloupe, which is in a Caribbean island, and then there's Awesene Sarr, who plays Karaba. So I found a PDF about film education. So what kind of story is Kirikou? The film is based on a story of ideas from one or more West African folk tales. These have been orally passed down through the centuries. Historical detail is not essential in African storytelling. A story would consist of a village and a sorceress with external characters embracing the story. This kind of story might be told by a griot, a poet, a musician, a storyteller to keep the oral tradition. And the film makes reference to several aspects of a traditional African culture. So baobab, which is a great African tree with an enormous trunk, in Kirikou, the big tree beneath which the old man talks to the children, and then the savannah, which is just the general open country of West Africa, of parts of West Africa. So why is this important? So it shows African people in a positive light, far from their struggles that they face, which is usually presented in movies and media. And I think it is very important to show that, but to show them other than that and just view them as human beings and seeing the beauty in their culture and everything is so important to me. And it is opening the surface to African culture for young children of different countries. And it is made for kids and helps them gain a positive view of African people instead of a white perspective of Black people. And they get it from a young age. So these are videos, we don't have to watch them, but they're just videos and of the movie, and that's what it is.
Thank you, Matt. Beautiful. All right, that was outstanding. We so appreciate.
So I'm not sure what happened to Patty's sound. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure what happened to Patty, but thank you to those of you who stayed on. We were hoping to get some Q&A going. I'm going to look into our, share our questions with you so that you can begin to sort of understand how we were framing it, but certainly feel free to, we're gonna open it up for people to ask us questions. Can we be given links to the students' work and enjoy their work. So we are in the midst of asking students to give their permission. We want to be very careful that these are works in progress, that our students are learning. And like we said in the very beginning, racial literacy is no single destination. It is a journey toward understanding and competency. And so, yes, the reading list, we are sharing our reading list and the discussion questions. And so there are parts of this that I can manipulate and share while I defer back to Linda and Not in Our Town to facilitate discussions, and I'll come back in with a few more links, okay?
We're going into breakout rooms now, right?
No, we're not going to do breakout rooms in the interest of time. We only have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So if people would like to open up questions, Linda has the discussion questions on her screen. And so we can elevate, or I could actually share them a little bit larger, but we have discussion questions that we would love to share. But if you have questions or want to just have an open conversation, maybe we have like 5 minutes. I don't know.
So Dr. BJ, can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Now we can.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi stopped working, so I'm on my phone now.
Okay.
I would just say if we could just look over the chat as questions arise. If students see specific questions directed to them, that student should feel free to answer it. If we can answer any questions, Dr. BJ, if you want to kind of just respond to any.
Yeah.
For the last couple minutes.
I see a lot of accommodations. Do similar literacy programs exist in other school systems? Thank you for your question, Francis. Not that we're aware. This is, like I mentioned earlier, that our first trip of this class this semester was to the New Jersey Department of Education meeting. We firmly believe that racial literacy programs need to be established in the state curriculum, something that's not just a collection of resources, but instead a challenge to start very early and getting students to understand domination and framework and deal with the hard histories of racism in the United States. So there are, go ahead.
Yeah, we connected with Hopewell. It sounded like they had been doing work in a club kind of format, but they were hoping to build out a similar program there. There were 2 more schools in New Jersey that were hoping to expand the program. But part of this too, as we look at changing curriculum, like Dr. Barnes-Johnson said, you know, it'd be so much easier for a district to mandate this if it came from the state. And so building that coalition to move towards the expansion of the program is important. But right now it's been more of a piecemeal, trying to connect with other schools to build out some more programs.
Are we done?
So students were on, a couple of people had questions for students about the experience for them. What was it like to be in this class? And if you're a senior in particular, what has it been like for you to be a senior in this moment in this class? If there are any students who want to respond to that.
Juniors can take it too.
Yeah, I think I can. So I'd say that just being part of this class, it really allowed me to, like, first of all, learn a lot more about how race actually presents itself in America. You know, we have a lot of people saying a lot of things just, you know, around us, but to actually get like kind of a really honest and open discussion about the truth, like something that's not really like, you know, I also got to hear from a lot of people's different perspectives, and I also got to speak openly about kind of what I felt about issues that I really cared about. And so if I could condense it, number one is that I felt like I could finally like actually express, you know, my experience. And second thing is I could actually hear other people's experiences that they could actually express. So I just felt like the class was somewhere where we could both learn and you know, share. Yeah.
Any other students?
I just wanted to like quickly add in. So I'm a junior, and I think that the best part about this class is that I became comfortable with talking about race. Before the taking the class, I wasn't really comfortable because I didn't understand it as well. I didn't know what to take into account when talking about race, and I feel like this class really taught me a really strong base that I can then use to expand and connect to what's happening today, because race changes all the time. And so that's my experience as a junior.
So I see a lot of people asking about whether or not this is something that can happen across grades. And I want to just address this. We're working on some things, but I want to reiterate the necessity to prepare teachers to teach in this way. Ashwin's presentation on curriculum violence is real, and sort of beginning to understand that perhaps the ways that we were taught, whether we were taught in Jim Crow schools or in integrated schools, understand that racism persists and continues to propagate. And so it's a mindset, anti-racism mindset, and seeing racism in curriculum is really important. So we're working on sort of an ecosystem approach to address education. Is there a basic textbook for the class? Yes, it is. The textbook is Race in America by Desmond and Immerbeyer. It's a sociology text that is a second edition. Thank you. Ms. Mainhart, put it there.
Oh yeah, I was just saying it's cool too to have Matthew Desmond at Princeton after we had used his text for the class.
Okay. Do the students share their new understanding with friends and follow? So yes, so some of that, what you heard from the statement of values, there are pockets of coalition, and it's, as teachers of this class, we do our best to bring everyone together. And so
and maybe some of our students too could chime in if
yeah.
they have a personal experience of sharing something from Racial Lit out with their friends. Not to be presumptive.
Yeah, I think especially this year, I definitely felt that racial literacy kind of helped shape how I went through other classes, because I know in peer group as well as in our Spanish class, we talked a lot about race and racial issues. And I think it was just very helpful to have the education and knowledge behind what we were talking about so that we could foster like a better conversation in both classes.
Awesome. Spencer, thank you. All right, Dr. BJ, we're at 8:32. How are you feeling?
I'm good. So if no one has questions, could you take this work and put together a senior project for next year? Yes, the goal, especially for our underclassmen, is to perhaps do that, continue the work. But for the students who are seniors going on, we want them to carry this beyond high school. And we're lucky because we have now enough cohorts of students that we can follow them. And several of the students that have been through our class previously that went on to college are doing social justice work. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity for them to start with the seeds that we plant, but have their college experiences be watered by additional work that they are doing. So, man, that was a super fast hour and a half. I cannot believe. I'm like, what? So thank you. Are there grants that we can help? You right? Oh, well, isn't that a wonderful question? I would say that's a great question. There's always, we need to talk about educational ecosystems. What we're seeing right now with the youth that were in Palmer Square, all on Nassau Street. And I need you all to, those of you old enough to remember the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, the Children's March of 1963 was in direct response to a need for children to reclaim the space. And so while children may march, adults must lead. And because we have the resources, we've got the money, for example. And so we can take what we can do and do something. And so there are plenty of conversations to be had, building coalition with places like the Paul Robeson House, with Centauri, with the Y, with Princeton Public Schools, with the Witherspoon Jackson Development Corps, with the historical societies here in Princeton. We rely heavily on Princeton community resources to support what we do. We didn't get to talk about who we invite in, right? Having Shirley Satterfield in. We don't get to talk about how many trips we make to Heinz Plaza and in through the library and the partnerships there. But all of these are things that we need to make the class what we do. We want to try and expand the program, and so we're working.
Yeah. Great. Well, these conversations are ongoing. I mean, it's not in our town's name, continuing conversations. I just want to thank everyone for coming here tonight, and especially thank our students for presenting, for being courageous, for making excellent work, and for sharing in this space. Dr. BJ, do you think we can pass over to Not in Our Town for closing?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Shelley, you with us?
Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Shelley Krause. Sorry for that little delay. I am one of the members of the board of Not in Our Town, Princeton. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We had over 80 people join us this evening. Thank you so much to everyone who, I want to say came out, but it's sort of stayed in, joined with us here in this space. One of the advantages of the move to Zoom is that we are able to record our programs. And so for all the folks who were saying, will you share the links? Can I see the rest of the student work? We are requesting permission from the students to share what they're comfortable sharing, and we will try to aggregate that as well as sharing out the video. It may take us a little while because we are a volunteer organization, but please, if you don't already have Not in Our Town Princeton's website saved somewhere, very important on your computer, take a moment to do that. It's niotprinceton.org, as you can see at the top of this slide. Save the date for Monday, July 6th, when we will be hearing from Caroline Clark, another board member. She's fantastic. And just as this session with the students is one of our most popular sessions every year, Caroline Clark is a wonderful presenter, and she's going to be speaking on resistance in the African American experience from the beginning through Black Lives Matter. Should be a fantastic program. I just want to add my voice to the chorus of folks who have said how inspiring and encouraging we find the sharing, the work of these students and teachers together, the creation of a culture of continual growth and learning. I would like to encourage everybody to channel their inner student, to think about the ways in which you could move yourself forward in this journey of racial justice through learning, through study, through transfer projects, through taking it out into the world, through conversations with people that you maybe haven't talked with about these kinds of issues before. Brittany Packnett Cunningham, who was an activist who came to sort of national prominence in the wake of the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, which seems like a million years ago and also seems like yesterday, says your role in social change starts 2 steps past where you're comfortable. So find where you're comfortable, take 2 steps past there, and begin. We want to thank you for joining us on our journey, and we look forward to seeing many of you and maybe some of your friends on Monday, July 6th. Take care and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, DJ.
You're welcome. Love y'all.
Back at you.
Back at you.
Awesome.
Thank you